Welcome back to another episode of Data with Peachy. This is I think I'm on episode, 13, 14? I think I'm on 14. This one's a different one. This one's special. It's special because it's the very first time I've ever had a guest on Data with Peachy. I have heard, obviously, perusing the comments on LinkedIn, I have heard and seen a lot of you say, hey, you really want to be on the show. We want to talk to you. We really want to get some insight. It's great to hear from you and your weird emoji and hair that you have, but it would be great to have somebody in the field that kind of knows, what's going on in their respective space. So this is going to be a long episode. So you know me, I have a very short attention span. And I think that actually does pretty well actually out in the LinkedIn world because we're very, very busy. But this episode is going to be a little bit longer. I have a very good friend, super smart chap. He knows so much about data privacy, data compliance, you name it. I've learned so much from him. So I'm very excited to bring him on. So hopefully in the comments, ask questions. I'll make sure that you can, parlay those questions over to him. And then obviously we'll link in his socials at the very, very end. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, very excited. First guest on Data with Peachy is actually Mr. Brian Mannion. Brian, welcome to
Hey,
Data with
Scott.
Peachy.
I'm honored. I should have known that from the research I did that you had not had any guests on previously, but I failed to notice that because of your iconic conversation and
Oh, iconic?
Peachy
Ooh,
and everything else. So,
not
no,
sure about
I'm
iconic.
honored to be here. Thank you for
Good.
letting me spend time with you and your this important topic that I so enjoy,
Good.
having spent so much time on over the years with you.
Yeah, we've had some real interesting conversations. Brian and I worked together for a while. He taught me a lot of things, but this is not about me. This is about Brian. So Brian, I'm going to ask I know you, like I know you well, but for the folks that don't know you and watch and listen to the podcast, whether that's via YouTube or your favorite podcasting application, who are you and what do you do in this world?
Sure. So, I am a lawyer. Don't let that scare you. Not all of us are scary. In fact, most of us are trying to make it up as we go. Where I'm a little more unique as a lawyer is I'm not afraid of technology. I live in the technology space. I sort of live in three different areas of the law. Started out in anti-money laundering, sanctions, know your customer, USA Patriot Act, got into that when I was at a prior institution from where you and I were working together. And then 9/11 hit, and that became a big part of my life. Then the other side I've lived in for a while is privacy, data governance, the whole concept of information security that grew out of the early privacy Graham Leach Bliley discussions. And then AI has come out of that, which is another type of data
Oh yeah.
governance. It's just all of this, by the way, we'll get into this. It's just an iteration of everything from Y2K. It's just building block upon building block upon building block. And then the third pond that I've been living in is I was general counsel, chief legal officer for a local startup. I've been doing that the last 4 years. We were a company called Aware, and we lived in the data governance space for collaboration tools. So we would help your company manage Slack and all of the unstructured data in Slack, whether that be managing it to determine what was in it, managing it for it to go away, or being able to learn from it from an analytical standpoint. We sold ourselves to a company called Mimecast, which I imagine many of your listeners are familiar with. And now I'm in the process of finding my next adventure. So I had time to come speak with you. So thank you.
No, I
But
appreciate
those
it.
are sort of the three ponds. Wrapped over all of that's been a technology.
Mhm.
I've lived in the technology space. A lot of lawyers get very uncomfortable with things that they don't understand. It's natural. I think everybody does that, not just picking
Mhm.
on lawyers. Technology is one of those areas that is particularly uncomfortable. It's not what we think we know now, it's what we have no idea is going to be happening in the future
Mhm.
is what really makes people uncomfortable. But I've lived in the technology space, which is where I've really got a chance to spend time with you. How do you implement new technology? I was part of the group thrown in a conference room and said, don't come out until the CEO can use his iPad. And an
Mm.
early example of that is that we figured it out, and the day we announced it was the day Steve Jobs announced iCloud and totally blew up all of our controls. So you have to get comfortable with uncomfortable and comfortable with not knowing. And that technology space I've thoroughly enjoyed. Getting to learn new tech, learn from people like yourselves and other experts. I don't understand all this, and I'm not afraid to say, Scott, I have no clue what you're talking about. Can you educate me and walk me through it? And then, more importantly, Scott, you're the kind of person that is okay with me asking questions.
Hmm.
Lawyers are brainwashed to think a particular way, and that results in me asking you a bunch of questions. And people don't like that. They get uncomfortable with that. And you, on the other hand, embraced the questions not as a Socratic
I,
opportunity,
I
but
was just
rather a chance for me to learn
no,
and for
I
to be
appreciate that.
offended by it.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most interesting concepts. Is I think people. So this is gonna match my 2 cents. Before I had met you, is like you're kind of always in the business or technology or where you are. You're kind of taught to be a little afraid of attorneys and lawyers because you might say something and be like, whoa, no, I mean, you totally can't do that. So I guess one of the questions, even like, I'll talk about if you always dreamt about being in data and technology and privacy, but you hit on something that I really like is the concept of legal teams being crucial and heavily involved in technology and data governance initiatives. So kind of under the guise of data, technology all going together, why is it critical? Like if you had to say to your legal counterparts at a lot of different companies, and you know that you're probably more unicorn and not necessarily the rule, what advice are you giving to your legal counterparts to say, no, go get involved?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you have to recognize that as a lawyer, my job is not to say no. I reserve the use of no because 9 times out of 10, just like in technology, we can get to the same answer. I just may need to zig and you may need to zag, and maybe I need to add 3 steps instead of the 1 step you wanted, but I can get you there. But it's not my decision. So me
Mm-hmm.
saying no is usually reserved for very specific things. I don't think that's consistent for all legal teams. I think they get a culture where they get burned and
Mm-hmm.
they get held accountable for everything that goes wrong. So then you're not likely to greenlight something you're not completely comfortable with. And in the tech space, you're rarely ever comfortable with stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So back to your question, why do I need the lawyer to be involved? I need to move the business forward. And I saw
Mm-hmm.
this dramatically to start up for 4 years. I could make a risk based decision. I could convince the CEO to do X, but that may not be the right business decision. And my job as a lawyer is to understand the tech, understand the business objective,
Mm-hmm.
and then help the CEO make an informed, or whoever the business
You're right.
decision maker is, help them make an informed decision. And the only way I can do that is in partnership with people like you,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not going to understand the tech. I wasn't trained on the tech. And frankly, if I understood the tech, you've already figured out 4 new techs that I don't even have a clue what they are. Because at the end of the day, my joke was my job is to keep the lawyers from shutting things off for
Mm-hmm.
fear of it, and try to keep you guys from chasing every shiny new toy because you must have your toys.
Yep.
And somewhere in between those two bookends is really the business objective that my peers can help the business leaders make by partnering with the different control teams. To me, data governance is a control team.
Mm-hmm.
You know, our job and your job is really similar in a lot of ways. We carry a different stick, we carry a different mindset, or maybe a different set of rules that we have to work under. But at the end of the day, you and I both want the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't, we got a bigger problem. But you and I both should want the business to be successful,
Yep.
which means we have to speak in business terms. We
Mm-hmm.
have to help the business understand why these things that Peachey and Mannion are talking about are important. And if we can't translate that to a business objective, then we're not doing our job.
Yep.
Because it's not all about is the right schema in place. Yes, those things are important, but I got to translate it to the business of why that's important,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of finishes the answer to your question in my mind. It's important to be at the table because we've done this many, many times. And every time we're not at the table, something gets done quick, something gets done fast. Maybe it meets a particular objective, but then there's a back end cost.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we decided we're not going to manage the data because no one's going to ever use this tool anyway. Why are we building a Porsche when all I needed was maybe a Hyundai?
Mm-hmm.
We're just going to go ahead and just do it. And, Mannion, shut up. Okay, fine. But we've all been there when that little insignificant tool all of a sudden became the holder of the crown jewels.
Yep.
And now we got to come back and spend four Porsches to fix that one little Honda Accord that we could have done in the first place, or
Mm-hmm.
insert whatever
Insert whatever.
calibration
I was gonna
you want
say,
to use.
yeah.
Analogy, yeah,
It's funny that you mentioned it because you hit on a couple things in that talking about speaking in the terms of the business, and I've talked a lot on a couple episodes at this point about the concept of data literacy and speaking in terms that our business partners, constituents, and leaders can understand. And you're right, our roles are very similar. We go about it different ways, but
sure,
the point remains that we've got to meet them where they are because they're, like you said, they're not attorneys, they're not lawyers, they're not data governance professionals. They are, chief marketing officers, they're chief sales, product owners, whatever the answer might be, right? And they don't know our stuff, and we don't need them to know, but we need them to trust in our opinions when we come and bring them. But you're right, we don't want to say no. We just want to say, how can we get there in the most efficient, controlled, protective way for the organization, for consumer data, insert whatever it is, to make sure that we're not putting the company at risk? Because one thing I would say is people think that we might be artificially making our role more important than it is by putting certain types of controls in, when in the reality is like, well, no, like I would rather just let you have keys of the kingdom and do whatever, but there's the whole privacy and regulation and compliance on the back end of this that ultimately is, my job, that I've got to be able to make sure I put them in the right position to be successful. So I think you're right. It is crucial for legal teams and data governance teams to be kind of intertwined. But I'll ask, what are some misconceptions that you may have encountered about the relationship between, legal teams and regulatory teams and governance teams? Like, what are some of those misconceptions you may have run across?
yeah. I think the biggest one I always run into is that you're not here to help me, or the classic "I'm from the government, I'm here to help," and it's all written in the context or the pretext of you're just being a pain in my butt. You're actually here to prevent, the prevention department.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kinds of things you run into a lot. And I think that again is incumbent upon the control team,
Mm-hmm.
data governance legal team, the audit team, the compliance team. These are all areas that are trying to provide guidance to the business. But we're only good if we understand, and you hit on this, but I want to drive it home.
Mm-hmm.
The business has an objective. They have something they're being tasked with doing. And if they don't sell the product, then you don't have a company. Like you can
Mm-hmm.
have a data governance, you can have your data owners, you can have your literacy as you can have the most amazing program in the world. But if you've effectively shut down or tied up the resources to where you're not doing what the company is doing to make money, congratulations, you're not really successful. So a lot of the perceptions, it's incumbent upon you to go in and listen,
Mm-hmm.
not to go in and immediately say, "Oh, you can't do it that way." We tend to be very black and white. I think the different control teams tend to be black and white. Let me be a little more specific. Legal lives in the gray. It's the world we're trained in. Law school is all about brainwashing you. We all go in very black and white, and after 3 or 4 years, if you go to night school like me, you get brainwashed, and it's now all gray. And I think the really good lawyers are the ones that can kind of start going back to black and white, but I will never see things the way I used to see them, meaning I can see lots of sides, lots of issues, lots of potential things that occur, and I have to figure out which ones I want to really harp upon or not. The compliance teams tend to be a little more black and white. What does the rule say? What does the
Mhm.
rule not say? I would argue that data science, or excuse me, data governance can be like that. Well, no,
Oh
my
yeah.
policy says this. Gosh
Yep.
darn it,
You must do this.
follow the policy, even though the
Hmm.
policy makes no sense. It didn't contemplate this particular thing. The end result is not practical and not a good business objective. And most importantly, you haven't demonstrated to me what risk we're trying to solve and
Mm.
why I should spend $4 million to solve it.
Yeah.
Because I'm only going to make one, and you want me to spend four. It means I'm losing 3 million. That makes no sense.
Hmm.
So I think what our job is to really sit down and try to understand what are the important pieces. Because to your point, we open up things in the future. And again, we hit on this a little bit, but to kind of broaden it, if you did your Y2K analysis, for those of you who are on this have no idea what that meant, there was this crazy concept that when we programmed in the 90s, excuse me, the 1900s,
Why you gotta
later,
do that? Come on, man. Why you gotta do that?
we did 00 for the month and then just the date. We never added the 1900 and X. You wouldn't
Hmm.
need it. And then Y2K came around, and it's like, oh God, now we've got 19 to 20. What are we doing with those extra numbers? And the reason I bring it up, not because of the silliness around it, but because it became a big exercise. Where's your data? Where
Hmm.
is it located? What system does it use? And is Y2K going to impact it? And that was the first data mapping in my mind that I really got into. And every large effort after that, all built on that same initial data mapping. Where's your data? Well, if you had done a good Y2K, you knew where all your data was.
Yep.
Well, guess what? A lot of companies didn't. They're just trying to get it done. Next came the privacy issues, and you're like, well, where's my data? Hey, I don't know. Except for those companies that we just did this exercise. It's
Hmm.
all here. And in fact, not only do we do it, we put some processes in place because it's such a pain in the butt that we won't have to redo it every time. So you had Y2K turn into GLB, GLB then turns into data breach and information security. Now we're in the whole ages of let's manage our data and delete data, because why are we keeping this
Mm.
forever? Because then that's a breach if we keep it around for too long and someone gets access to it when I even need it in the first place. And then we move past that. Now we're in AI. I've got all this data and I want to leverage it. I want to
Hmm.
leverage it for business reporting. I want to leverage it for creating some new machine learning that we all like to call AI. And
Yeah.
at the end of
Oh
the
God, don't even get
day,
me started on that.
I know cracks drives me nuts. Although in fairness, we had some amazing data scientists that are aware, and I learned so much from them because
Interesting.
they were good. But at the end of the day, you're trying to say to yourself, where's your data located? Let me
Hmm.
help you understand where your data is, what the data is, who has access to the data, and then we can start building our controls rationally. So
So
those are kind of the things we've run into over the year. Why are you here to help me? You're not really here to help me. You're just going to make it more complicated.
so somewhat off like the line of questioning that we had scheduled. I gotta ask. Do you think any company okay, any company, that's not fair. That's too broad. Do you believe that more than 25% of companies know and manage their data? Like truly know and manage their data. Like it's one thing to say that, yeah, I know where all my data is. Sure, but behind the scenes you have a tremendous
Uh,
amount of back work that you've got to go to get that answer. Do you believe that more than 25% companies could stand up today and say, I know exactly where my data is?
I don't think anybody can say I know where all my data is because there's too much data. But
Mm-hmm.
to answer your question, the bigger the company, the more regulated the company, the higher the percentage that you can say I know my data. The smaller the company, the more narrow the company is, the more they can say that they know where the data is because it's a smaller subset. We
Mm-hmm.
knew where our data was, but there are only so many places you could put it
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't have as many tools. You go to a Fortune 100 that is heavily regulated, they probably know where their data is too because they're so regulated. It's the medium-sized companies that have tons of data that don't have the resources. They're the ones I'd put under 25%. The larger the company, I'd put you higher than 25%.
Let me reword it a little bit differently and say it this way. Do you feel that I agree with you on the bigger the company, they know where their data is. Do you believe that they know how often their data is replicated for other things? They could go back to the source and find it at the source. Do you feel like they have a full understanding of the usage once it leaves that source?
No, but I don't think it's a fair question
Okay.
because there's so many people in the company being tasked with so many things that if you haven't spent the money on a single source of data and controls for that source of data, then you're going to have replication of the data. And on the one hand, if it's all sitting within your secured environment, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Certainly, the more you replications, the more your attack vector increases, your attack surface increases, excuse me, so that increases some risk. But if you've done a great job of locking it all down, you've just added some more drawers. Is that really a concern? And is it offset by the value to the business? I don't know. What you're really getting at is, do we get rid of data? And the answer
Mm-hmm.
is no. And we don't get rid of data. And here's, again, I'll pick on my group. The last 4 years, I've spent time convincing companies to buy our product.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually around, wait, we just brought Slack in, don't know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
The control teams get uncomfortable. They find out that there's a whole set of communications because the control teams live in email, or
Yep.
the legal team does. And I don't know what the Slack thing is. I don't know where this data is. I've spent 20 years building controls for email, so I'm now uncomfortable with what Slack is. And during the course of those conversations, inevitably it is the legal team or the control teams want Slack communications to go away as quickly as they can. They want them gone in like 3 days. And
Wow.
I'm always like, then why did you buy Slack? What's the point? And my follow-up question is, when do you, control team, delete your email? And inevitably, the control team keeps their email
Forever.
2, 3, 4 times longer than the corporate policy because, oh, well,
I'm
we need
special.
to keep ours.
Well, I have to prove things, you know.
And maybe it's for litigation, that's fair. But
I bet it's
really, it's
not.
because we live in a world where we're allowed to keep the data
Mm-hmm.
because it might be needed at some point. And we don't live in a world where we're enforcing company policies to actually get rid of data. One of
Mm-hmm.
my dreams for this company, which I'm not part of anymore, and they're not really going in this direction anymore, but I wanted to be able to go to a lawyer at some point and say, look, I can get rid of the 20% of your Slack messages that are junk. Hey, Scott, what time are we doing this? Hey, Scott, you want to go play some golf? Hey, Scott, what time are
Mm-hmm.
we going to do? I don't need to keep those messages for 6 months. I don't need to keep them more than like a couple days, right?
Yep.
I want to be able to find the nonsense. And then I want to find the other 20% that are the uncomfortable things. They're violations of policy. They're credit cards that aren't supposed to be in the system. It's information that we don't want to have in the tool at all. It's an M&A that's been completed, whatever. That other
Mm-hmm.
high risk HR stuff. What should be left is the actual data that the company uses on a day-to-day basis
Mm-hmm.
to do its job. So don't I want to keep that? Don't I
Yeah,
want to
you would
keep that
think.
for 3 or 5 years? But I want to get rid of the junk on the edges because it's the junk on the edges that make everybody uncomfortable. The business is uncomfortable keeping data because, well, I pulled every single message and all it was let's go to lunch. This is a waste of time. And the control teams pull the messages and go, there's like two people having conversations I don't want to be having on a corporate tool.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get rid of that stuff. And what's left is the actual knowledge management that we need and that people like you can then come manage.
Mm-hmm.
because I want to have access to that. I want to control access to who needs to get access to it, and I want it to go away eventually, but not tomorrow,
Right.
because that actually has value. But we're not there. So to your point, I think we keep stuff too long or we delete it too quick, and that we don't do a good job of understanding where the actual knowledge is. Because we've been dancing around knowledge management for my entire legal 25-year career of where's the knowledge, how do we
Mm-hmm.
manage it, how do we use it, where can we make sure it stays and then the rest of it goes away, how do I do e-discovery on it, how do I do policy controls on it, how do I do the things I need to do to manage the data. Well, we don't even know where it is. We don't know where to find it. And we don't know how to make the right stuff go away. So we end up either deleting it all or keeping it forever.
I was going to be my follow up question is what's a bigger risk to the organization?
Mm-hmm.
Keeping it forever
It's always
or
going to, I'm going to give you the lawyer answer. It depends, Scott.
okay, fair. Taking your lawyer hat off for a second and hanging it up on the stoop, in your professional opinion, not lawyer, is it a bigger risk to purge it too early or keep it too long? Now, obviously, there are things that we have to legally have a minimum on. We know that. So just assume for a moment we're meeting our regulatory floor. So knowing that that's not an issue, which one's a bigger risk?
Yeah, it's almost impossible to answer. My
Yeah.
guess is always going to be if you're keeping the data that moves the business and that the business needs, then you want to keep it. And deleting it prevents a business objective or
Yeah.
potential business value. Now, I can tell you that answer changed from 4 years of being so closely involved with a startup and business and a different risk analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Because keeping the data increases my expense to that data.
Mm-hmm.
So if the answer to your question is keep the data, but don't spend any more to control it, then delete the damn stuff because now you're increasing your risk.
Okay.
If you want to keep the data, because you should keep the data, because the data is your source of knowledge, which by the
Mm-hmm.
way, we've got everybody leaving. Now everybody has to come back to the office. People are going to be
Mm-hmm.
mad about coming to the office. So does
Yep.
this mean we're going to have another great movement of people leaving to go to a company what they want to be because they don't want to go back to the office? I don't know. Maybe we'll have another one of those. Maybe we won't. But again, that puts a pressure on knowledge management.
Mm-hmm.
Where's our knowledge? It's in teams. Okay, how do I leverage that? How do I give access to the right people? If I'm just going to get rid of that in 2 years, then all I'm doing is moving it out of Teams into some unstructured shared drive, some unstructured OneDrive, SharePoint. I'm picking on Microsoft environment
It's
at the
easy to
moment,
do.
but you can pick whatever you want. And now again, I'm not managing the data. So if you're gonna say keep it all, but I'm not gonna manage it, then I'd rather you just get rid of it because that's the safe, depending on the type of data, but I'm presuming
Yeah,
it's
I know
got
what you
PI,
mean. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's got credit cards, I'm assuming it's got all things you don't want in there that increases your information security risk.
That's a really
But then,
interesting concept because I think a lot of people they're like, I definitely do this as a data governance professional. Is I tend to lean on the once I've met my regulatory minimum, I have met exactly what the law tells me I have to keep it. 7 years. Well, I want it gone at 7 years and one day, but I've even walked that back from where I was probably 5 years ago because that's an easy answer. Well, business wise, that's really hard to do. Plus, we're a lot of the businesses are trying to do new things, but also managing that data is very difficult. Do you find that is it is are we getting lost in the sauce of the management part, right? Like it is the we want to keep the data, but I also don't want to invest in the management side of that. And that's really where the introduction of risk happens, right? Like it's one thing, like I would say, okay, if we want to keep data forever, fine. I'm totally fine with you doing that, but something has to happen. And it's usually that's where the ball is dropped.
yeah, the other side of that, and think about what your risks are. So I'm going to keep the data longer. So that increases my information security risk. We've all known that. We've thought about it.
Hmm.
Increases some storage costs. But every time we say that,
Storage
storage is
just
going.
goes, yeah, it gets
So
so
is
cheap.
that really the cost? But it is a cost because I may move to a new system, which means I now need to move that data to a new system. And did we
Hmm.
actually move it to the new system, or did we just dump it someplace else and now we've
Come
got
on, man,
that
that
issue?
never happens. What are you talking
Yeah, so the
about?
more you keep the data, the more you have to spend managing. The other
Hmm.
side of it is the litigation risk. If I had deleted all of, when I left 2 companies ago, if they deleted all my email and a litigation shows up, specifically naming me 5 years after I've left, there's nothing to respond to. That data was gone because the policy was emails get deleted after 6 months unless subject to a legal hold.
Hmm.
If they had kept all my emails because someone wanted to, and let's not pretend my emails have any value, but they wanted to keep my emails for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. That litigation showed up. Now they have to spend money to look through my email. So if you're going to keep the data, you have to manage the data. You also have the preference controls. So I'm going to
Hmm.
keep all this customer data, but I'm not going to keep a preference on how it was used, what controls were kept or permitted with that data when I first kept it. Well, to me, if you're at all these costs, you may say to yourself, it's not worth it, just delete it.
Hmm.
But, and it's a valid point, but in my mind, I'd push back and say, well, if you're going to keep it the right way and understand there's some cost to it, then it's up for the business to explain to me why the value of keeping it around longer is worthwhile. And they may come up with some great reasons. I don't want to handcuff the business. I
Hmm.
want the business to be creative. I want the business to be um, timely. I want them to be strategic. I want them to go make a bunch of money so the company stays in existence and I continue to have a job, all doing it the right way.
Right.
But if you're not going to manage it and you don't want to spend the money on it, well, then don't tell me there's a value to keeping it because you haven't justified the business value because I'm giving you the expenses. I'm
Hmm.
giving you the right hand side of the risk equation. Now, you business, you give me the left hand side of that equation and let the finance folks tell us that it outweighs the expense. And by all means, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's figure it out. And there's a phrase which I'm not sure I can use on your podcast, but LFG is the phrase that
Oh,
was used
yep,
in
yep.
startup world, and
Well,
I'm not gonna.
I was gonna say
Uh,
you can definitely use the acronym. That's good. And
I
if
can
you
use
don't know
it.
that in the business world, I bet you probably do. Really
It's
think
okay.
maybe
That,
Google it.
that that was one of the weird worlds of startups. Language and alcohol. 2 worlds I was not involved in when I came from state
Interesting. Really?
Fortune 100 company. But man, I'm telling you, it's like we had one of our coolest spaces in our office, which I don't think you ever got to our office.
No, I
But one
never
of the
did.
coolest spaces was a speakeasy with a
Oh, that's
hidden
so awesome.
door. It, and that's just symbolic of the type of environments that you work at in a startup space. So yeah, it's a little different
Yeah, that's
environment.
awesome.
Yeah,
I like that
once you get
though.
the equation, then go
Yeah.
get it, figure it out. I want to engage the business, but they can't act like there aren't costs, both
Hmm.
on the side they understand, but also on the control side that you and I represent.
Do you think that sometimes they look at our roles as, well, but that's why you exist. You exist to make sure that you do that. Like you do that for me. I don't have to do it because I hear a lot of times is, um, I'm in the business. You're in the data. I just assume you're going to take care of that for me. Is it done yet? Because I've heard that a lot. I've heard that a lot in a lot of comments. Is sometimes I believe that some of our business leaders don't realize that they own that soup to nuts. That includes the legal side. That includes
Yep.
the data
Yep.
side. Like again, we will provide our opinions, but ultimately, at the end of the day, we'll give you every ounce of risk that you're looking for. Do this. This is what happens. Da 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 da. But they make the decision, and sometimes I think that's lost.
Yeah, and I think that's our fault. I think
Okay.
we spend too much time trying to own, prove value, demonstrate that we're good for the business, put our foot down when they're doing something wrong. And at the end of the day, the business is the one who owns it, The
Mm-hmm.
business is the one that's accountable for it, and the business has to make the decision. So my job, and it can be easier in the legal space. Let's acknowledge I sit down in front of some people, I give them the risk, they make a decision, and oftentimes I kind of get to walk away till there's a problem later, right? You guys, compliance teams, it's a little more complicated because you're like, okay, you made this decision and you decided not to fund anything. So what am I supposed to do now? Because I can't do my job. So
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate it's not always as simple, but the business has to own it. And every time we help the business, every time we take a little more authority from them, every time we demonstrate we have more value, that frees them up from having to own the decision and the
Mm-hmm.
consequences from the decision. And that's where I think, your data owner becomes a clearly important piece. Your leaders of legal or leaders, your executive teams, they have to have those difficult discussions of no, you said as a company we're going to be an ethical company, and you said as a company we're going to not have a data breach. Okay, these are the things that are part of that. Now business, you want to roll out tool X, great, you've priced it at Y, it's not Y, it's Y plus 5.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry that we don't like that, but you've made these decisions and you can't have it both ways. And those are conversations that have to take place, and they have to take place at the executive level and the finance teams. Like, finance is our partner. We
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes kind of get frustrated with finance. I had a
Oh yeah.
great CFO at the last company I was with, incredibly knowledgeable. And he was really good at helping the business go, no, this is your cost. Now, you need to demonstrate that you can sell enough to offset that cost. And if not, we've got to go back and rethink the sales plan. You can't act like you want to make the decision, but you're not going to be accountable to
Mm-hmm.
the decision. And I'm not picking on anybody. We had a great
Oh yeah,
sales
no.
team, or
Yeah, yeah.
loved our CRO. I'm just using it as an example of, at the end of the day, we oftentimes make it easier for the business to not be held accountable. And that's our fault. We own that.
Is it because a lot of the time, and again, this is, by the way, for the folks that are still listening to this is not in the line of questions that we this is just two friends talking. These are not in the questions we prepared for at all. So you're getting it literally off the cuff from both of us. I agree with you that I think a lot of times that we are the ones that take that away from the business, because a lot of times we're told, well, what value is it that you provide? You're a cost center. How many times have we heard that one? You're a cost center. You don't really drive the value to the business. You don't bring in customers. You don't do X, Y, and Z. You don't generate revenue. You are a cost center. So we hear that a lot. And I think it is, I'll speak very candidly, a lot of it is fear for our jobs that we do some of these things. And so how do we empower our other legal and data brethren that are out there in the world, living and breathing the fact that they're told they need to provide value and bring something to the table? But the reality is, you're right. The business owns all this stuff. What advice could we give them that they could glean from us?
Sure. First off, none of this is easy. So let's not pretend it is. If it was super easy, we'd have our own consulting company someplace and we'd probably be
Millions
making
of dollars.
yeah, billions and billions. So none of
Billions.
this. But at the end of the day, I've got to speak business. I've got to understand how my control and the cost of my control compares to the business value that's trying to be implemented. And if we think that you need to do this, we need to look at that rationally from the business lens. And then we have to be able to speak business. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that speak business might be your right person, salesperson, excuse me. You can go ahead and sell 50 of those. But by selling 50 of them, you increase our risk profile by 500. Does that really make sense? And more importantly, let me show you what you're not going to be able to do with the data, because you chose not to implement a preference control system, so that I don't know which customers have opted in and which customers have opted out, which customers are in California, which customers are in Colorado. Why do I care about these things? Because every day they're passing new laws that are state specific. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
wait, the federal government will come along and fix everything.
No, they will not.
Even if they come and fix it, which we can all have that debate, it won't be in a way that will be consistent with what we've been doing.
Yep.
So every single conversation we have has to be to help the business understand what's coming down the pike. That's where I provide value. I provide value that we've seen this before. I've already mentioned this goes back 20, 30 years. This isn't new concept. There's a new twist. Nobody thought about machine learning quite the same way, but yet
Sure.
we've been doing machine learning for 15, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's just been called something different, right?
Yep.
So AI, yes, it's a large language models and the ability that we can do. I can now write a legal memo in 5 seconds with Chat GPT after I reviewed it and sure it doesn't have any anomalies, etc. But that's not anything that I could have done 20 years ago. So these
No.
are iterations or they are evolutions. You can debate that. But at the end of the day, they're also building on things we've seen. So we can come to the table and go, look, rationally, I can build this control, and this control will likely help me get this, this, and this. I can build this control, and I can start doing some of these other things. Based on my understanding of the business, you've told me you want to capture this market, you want to go into Europe, you want to sell to these people. Okay, these are controls you need. Otherwise, you're not going to get
Mm-hmm.
the bottom line value you're expecting to drive to shareholder, investor,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it was.
Yep.
That's where I think we add to the table. And those are all conversations based on relationships. It is really hard to come have a difficult conversation with someone the first time you meet them because they
Mm-hmm.
don't know what they've been burned. Again, we're always viewing this from our lens. Let's view it from their lens. Someone came in, told them they had to do this. I spent $2 million doing this. The business changed its mind and we never did it.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm out 2 million. The CFO's down my neck because I don't have this thing done. She's asking me to do this and I still can't get this done. Blah, blah, blah. So they've been burned. So how do you develop a relationship? How do you develop trust? And how do you view it from the business? You've got to have a business focus because if you just walk solely from a control standpoint, and let's acknowledge we're all controlled.
Oh yeah.
We're talking
Yeah.
first round, second round. That's not right. First level, second level,
Are
third
you talking
level.
about the lines of defense?
Line
First
of
line.
defense.
Yeah.
First
Yeah.
line of defense. Gee, God.
It's all right. You were a little
Sorry.
rusty. It's all right. We got you.
We can edit that. If it's the first line of defense, second or third, they're all controls. But how do you speak in a way that is meeting the business objective?
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to have that lens. Otherwise, man, I've sat. I had an old boss, great guy. His statement was, "You stand where you sit." And it took me a while to understand that. But depending on which seat you sit in, it's what you stand for. So you may be a super data person because you're now information security.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you flip into a business role, it's not that you stopped caring about information security, but you're now sitting in a different spot.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to stand for some different things.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately, to your point, I do represent a view. My job is to advocate for it. And then the right level of person make a decision. So if the business wants to do X and we think you need to do Y, how do you get that elevated to where the right leader makes a decision? And they may not be the one that we want them to make, but they've made it. Then
Mm-hmm.
how do we try to do something to deal with it?
You
And
feel-
that becomes a challenge.
Do you feel like, and I know that I can speak to this from my perspective, I don't think a lot of companies, well, that's probably a bold statement. I think a lot of companies have opportunities when it comes to linking their data strategy to business strategies. I think that a lot of companies have data strategies. I'm going to make data available and it's going to be observable and we're democratizing, and they're going to use words like that, but those don't mean anything to the business because they're like, I don't know what that means.
And
democratizing
why?
what, like
I like
why?
this.
So
Yeah.
I guess I say all that to say is I think one of the biggest areas, and I'm seeing a shift in the data space, well, especially if you look at LinkedIn, they talk about taking your data strategy and linking it to very specific business objectives. Do you feel like privacy, legal, all have an opportunity to do something similar where they link to business objectives?
I think, and arguably they've been doing it for a while. I think your good legal teams have been partnering with the business for quite a while. The trick is, what area of the business am I representing? What
Mm-hmm.
level of the company am I at? What's the company's objectives? A lot of this goes back to the company says their core ethics is X, Y, and Z. Well, is it really? And
Mm-hmm.
if it is, then those have certain consequences, certain expenses, certain controls that are necessary. Um, and then you've got to partner with the business that you've been doing for a while to go, okay, look, I know you want to sell this. You want to sell it the right way. We don't want the attorney general to get after us. So let's do it this way. And the business is like, well, yeah, I don't want the attorney general after me either. And I don't want to have to give the money back I just worked my butt to get.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'll do that. Whatever, that's fine. So I think you've always had a conversation of translating the control to the business so the business understands why they need to do it. I think what you're hitting on is, if you're going to manage data for the sake of managing data, that I think is a lost battle. You
Mm-hmm.
have to manage data for the sake of the business value it's
Mm-hmm.
going to provide.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I need to connect my data lake effort specifically to sales objective one, two, and three? Well, that might be nice, but I think there's a bigger objective that we can help the
Mm-hmm.
sales team understand, that you want to do reporting and your data is now in 25 different locations and you spend 10 people and 4 clouds to figure out how to do reporting. Where if you just put it in one place, I can give you better reporting.
Correct.
However, I still have to have some things when I put it in one place.
Mm-hmm.
So let's work through that. And they're like, okay, yeah, that's great. Go build. And then that's where the data expert like yourself and others on this that listen to this will say, okay, I now know it's in one place. That's going to cause these other downstream implications. So how do I make sure
Mm-hmm.
we address that? Because I got to scope out the cost. Am I going to do a t-shirt size scoping? Well, if I'm going to do a data lake, the t-shirt size scoping is not a small risk. That's a big project. That's a lot of data in one location. I got to make sure I'm addressing a lot of boxes.
Mm-hmm.
One of them has to be the business accessing it. And if the
Mm-hmm.
business is going to access it, then what kind of controls am I having for the business? And then that goes to one data lake, all the other questions you've talked about. What is the definition I'm using, and how do I put the data in the right way? And I don't have junk in and garbage in, garbage out, and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Because then I haven't achieved anything. And that's also a good example where the business is accountable. You and I can talk data literacy and data controls and data owners all day long.
Mm-hmm.
But if the business doesn't understand that when you let someone just put junk in, you get a report later that makes no sense, that wasn't because of us. That was
Correct.
because you didn't require your business person to input in the state field the name of the state, because they put it in the address field because that was easiest because of the antiquated legacy system we had.
Yep.
And nobody wanted to
Mm-hmm.
spend the money to translate it. Okay, great. I have a
Mm-hmm.
data lake, and my data lake is now filled with no states. What kind
That
of
would never
reporting?
happen. What do you mean? No, no
It's
company
merely a
ever does.
hypothetical. I'm
Totally
not trying to bring any
hypothetical.
specific history up here. So again, those are the types of where we do provide the value. We do help you understand it. Now let me go ahead and figure out with you what you want out of it, so I can tell you what you need to do to put into it to get that out of it.
Okay, so one last parting shot before we get to your socials and we talk about where they can find you on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever social media you do is what is a bit of guidance that you would give a data professional, a data governance professional, somebody going into this particular field? Like, what would you say to them?
First off, tremendous amount of respect. This is not an easy job. It's not easy to. We've been talking business. We haven't really talked about IT or
Oh,
engineering, whatever phrase you want to
got a
use.
roll.
They're just as much a challenge. So it is not an easy job. The rules are changing every day. Um, you do have to demonstrate some value, and that's not easy. So it is hard. And there are days you're going, there may be more days you lose, whatever that means, than win. It can be frustrating. But if you have a passion for this, and almost everybody in this space does, they
Mm-hmm.
have a passion for putting data in the right place, for doing it in a way that makes sense, and for helping people get value out of the data. So my guidance is a it's okay to talk to the lawyer. They're not going to bite. Um, we may look like it. Frankly, we may deserve to get stopped every once in a while. But at the end of the day, we're not going to bite. So spend time talking to us about what we're trying to work through, what our concerns are, what we're balancing the risks of. Definitely partner with your IT experts. They understand the underlying technology of whatever tools being implemented, and they know it, and they know it cold, and they're experts, and you've got to leverage them
Mm-hmm.
because it partners with them, it creates collaboration, and it's okay to say I don't know. There seems to be this concern in society, at least in work, that you can't say I don't know. It's okay to
Mm-hmm.
say I don't say I don't know and don't do anything about it, but
Mm-hmm.
you can say, I don't know. Great question. Let me find out. Let me go get the expert. Let me ask them questions. Let me work and educate myself so I can give a better answer. So those are probably the things that jump to my head. I guess the last piece is if you don't understand something, it'll change in tomorrow anyway. So just figure the next thing out. Um, but
Yeah,
no,
just,
I mean,
there's always something else coming. Don't worry about it.
something else will come along. But it is not easy, but it is such a wonderful and key component to any good data governance are the experts like yourself and the team that you represent that helps get the job successfully done. And I can't do my job without you folks. And I am internally thankful for everything you bring to the table. Doesn't mean I always agree. And
Oh yeah. I.
Scott can say that, but
Oh
that's
yeah.
not the point. I value the perspective you're bringing. So don't stop it. Keep the passion, and we'll keep working to figure this out at one point.
I love it. And Brian's right. Like the idea is like there are times where him and I will vehemently disagree with one another, and then we'll go get lunch. And like we don't really think much about it. It's just it's again you're attacking the problem and not attacking the person. And I think that
Yeah.
sometimes that's lost as well. Is like somebody has to lose and somebody has to win because that's the way we are. And it's really we're just trying to look. We're just trying to get it to the end of the day, get to a 5 p.m., then go have some family time, and then call it a day, right?
Yeah.
So, all right,
Yeah.
Brian, this is probably like you could not have kicked off this guest series any better. I am so thankful that you took the time to speak with me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So now I want to ask, where can people find you? Where in the world can they find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me.
Okay.
I'm on LinkedIn, Brian Mannion. I
I
think
will make sure that I will provide the
I've
link.
got the, yeah, you can put it in the thing. I've got
Out.
actual. So
Perfect.
LinkedIn's the best way to hit me up. And then once you're interested, we can Slack directly. I mean, excuse me, or email or text or whatever. I'm pretty open. Right now I'm really open. I've got plenty of time. But that's not why you should be hitting me up. If there's anything I can do to help, don't hesitate to reach out on LinkedIn and we'll go from there. So
Awesome. You also know where to find me. If you've been listening to this on YouTube, consider doing all the YouTube things like share, subscribe, thumbs up, comments, and all that jazz. If you're watching or listening to this on your favorite podcast provider, consider giving it a 5-star review. As always, this has been episode, what did I say, 14? Are we on 14 episodes? Oh, Lord. 14 episodes with Data with Peachey, and we will have more guests coming shortly. I'm working on calendars for the next 2, maybe 3. So, but Brian kicked it off. I mean, you could not have, tell you what, that's a tough, you set the bar very high, my friend, really
well, I'll be
high. So,
happy to come back after you've had many, many guests because
love
I
that.
always enjoy with you and this topic and frankly the people that listen and follow your this podcast. thoroughly enjoy it. So thank you
Thank
for
you,
the
my
opportunity.
friend. I appreciate you. So, all right, y'all. This has been Data with Peachey, episode 14, and we will catch you in the next episode. Thanks.